Caldwell with Finish First Restoration.
And I'm Mike Mangan.
And we're back here today. We've towed the truck back to our restoration center, and we're going to do an assessment on this truck. I've jotted down a couple notes. We've got to go through the motor, figure out what we're going to do with the cab, the truck bed. We're going to do something custom, interior. A lot of decisions to be made, but I'm looking at the truck and I wouldn't know where to get started. So what do you think?
Well, I think we'll try to use as much as what we have that we can. So
Okay.
We'll try to use the drivetrain. So the first thing we need to do is get this thing running and make sure that that's good, because if it's not, then we're going nowhere.
Well, that makes sense to me. So let's do this assessment, figure out what we've got to do to get this thing restored.
So now that we got the bed off of it, there was only 4 U-bolts holding it on, and we needed a fork truck to come in here and get it off a little heavy, so it's off now.
Well, now that it's off, we can get a better view of how we're going to make this custom bed for the truck, and it really gives us a better visual. We can get good measurements and figure out how these running boards and back flares are going to go into place. So
Yeah.
what's next, Mike?
The next step is start tearing the cab and the front end off of it.
Let's get going. Now that we're this far along through the tear down, we've got the whole front end off, we've got the bed off, we've got most of this interior out, but I noticed underneath the seats that they've got the gas tank under there.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. It's only about a 1/2 inch off that drive shaft, and if you ever lose that front universal, it would come straight up through that gas tank. So I say we make a new cell behind the rear axle and get rid of this one.
Okay, well then we're just down to a few more things. We've got the steering wheel to take out. There's a couple other things out front that needs unbolted, and this cab's ready to come off.
You bet, we'll be down to nothing but a rolling chassis.
Well, let's lift this baby up. Wow, this thing looks totally different.
Yeah, we're down to the bare basics now, so we're finally ready to get some of these parts sent out, so I think we ought to start with the chrome.
Well, let's get all the parts together. We'll meet you guys next week down at Metal Bright, and we'll show you the whole process.
So we've just come back from Metal Bright, and now what we're going to do is get the rest of the stuff sent out. So we need to get the frame sent out to get sandblasted, but first we want to pull this motor out of here. And then we're going to get the rest of the sheet metal parts off to an acid dipper, because we don't want to sandblast those because you can actually warp the panels up. So we're going to get started by pulling this motor out of here. So we got everything disconnected, and we let the engine hoist do the work. Make sure everything clears. And out we go.
And we're back here today. We got the parts back from the acid bath. And we're at the preparation stage, which is the most important stage of the 4P process. And the reason why is you can hire the best painter available, and if the preparation isn't done right, then the paint job is not going to turn out. So we've got some remnants of rust here. What do you suggest we do with this, Michael?
Well, rust pits into metal, so you don't really want to use any kind of heavy grinding on it because it's just going to thin the metal out anymore. You kind of need to get down into those pits to remove that. So What you got laying there is some good products to start with.
Well, a couple of the products we have here is our paint and rust strippers. There's a couple different ways you can identify all the preparation products. They're all color keyed in red, so they're easily identifiable. So whenever you're in the prep stage, just pick the products that are in the red and you've got the right grit range for the products you need for that preparation. So this actually mounts to a drill mount, and we've also got one that mounts to an angle grinder. Both of these products do great. It just depends on what tool you have, and that's what product you can use.
Sure.
Now, if we didn't get this acid bath, a lot of times we would go directly to a 40 grit. 40 grit's going to strip all the paint and rust right off of there, but since we did, we're not going to have to go that aggressive with this because it's already cleaned up a little bit. I think 80 grit's going to work great for this.
Yeah, 80 grit, and you can go all the way to 180. I wouldn't go anything finer than that because then you might have problems with the primer not adhering.
Okay. Now we've also got some preparation discs. We got grinding discs. Now you mentioned to me earlier about the grinding disc, maybe not so good on this particular part.
Well, each product has its use, you know. Those grinding discs might be great for knocking the hard edge down off of it and going back over it with those conditioning discs because they kind of smooth that edge over.
Okay.
So, you know, like I said, each product has its use and its place. Those 2-inch and we got 3-inch discs to get down in here some of these grooves to get some of that intricate fine stuff that a DA wouldn't get down in there and
Okay.
take out.
Well, let's go ahead and start stripping this down and get ready for primer. That way this stuff doesn't start rusting on us.
Yeah, we got a lot of parts, so we need to get started.
All right.
Okay, this is working pretty good, getting down into those pits, getting that rust out. So we'll continue using this until we get all that rust out of there and the other tight spots in the areas that we need to get the conditioning disc into. The 2-inch size is great for getting down into those tight spots.
All right, we're just finishing off getting the rest of this rust off. We're using an 80 grit DA sandpaper, and what that does is it's going to put a nice scratch pattern on here so that the epoxy primer is going to adhere properly. Now we've got a lot of other parts to work with, so next time what we're going to do is some cutting and grinding, and look forward to seeing you then.
So what you want to do is you want to check it over pretty thoroughly and make sure that the sandblaster got in all the little nooks and crannies. And if they haven't, then a great thing to use is these prep pads because you can conform it into about any shape and it will get back into tight areas where you can get in there and sand pretty good to rough stuff up. So what we're going to do next is we are going to be doing a little bit of welding. The back of this frame had a dump bed on it and it was pretty crudely done. So we shaved a little bit of the rear of the frame rail off, and what we had left was a little half-shaped moon here where the pivot point was. So I just made a little piece of metal that I'd cut out and ground down with a flap disc to get my shape, and I made it a little bit long so I can trim it down later after it's welded into place. Now the trick to doing this is you want to make sure as you're welding it in that it's flush on both sides, and then just get a couple tacks in there to hold it in place. After it's welded, you're going to need to grind it down. And we're going to be using a 60 grit flap disc to do that. And the key to doing that is when you're grinding that weld, you need to stay on top of that weld. You don't want to veer off to the metal around it. You want to stay on top of that until it starts to level down to the rest of the surface. And once it gets to that point, then you can kind of taper off and feather the edges out and feather it into the rest of the metal. So we're going to get this all finished up painted, and after that this thing will be ready to start assembling some parts on. So in our next video we're going to show you how to do some body work and some cool tips and tricks on how to go through that process. So until then, we'll see you next week. Okay, now we have all the body work done on it. We got it DA'd down with 80 grit. So the next step we need to do is clean this real good and apply body filler in the areas that still has a little bit of distortion.
Okay. So you're going to use a wax and grease remover, wipe it down, and then apply the body filler.
And then apply the body filler. So we're going to go ahead and mix that up now. So what you want to do is you don't really want to stir it. You just kind of want to pull from the sides and pull it into the center. And then we're going to put about a 4-inch circle on here, because that's about all we need. So
Well,
it's
from what I understand, if you stir that up like it's a can of paint, you're going to create air bubbles, which is going to show in your end result.
yeah, you're going to have air bubbles in there, and you won't know that until you go to prime, and then you're just going to add another step in there. So we're going to put about just one stripe across there. Then we're going to start mixing it up. And what we want to do is we want to try to keep this thinned out and just press down and pull as you go. And that's going to help push those air bubbles out if there is any. And depending on how hot it is gonna matter. The hotter it is, the faster it's gonna dry. So we just need a thin coat on this. You don't want to try to just pack a bunch of stuff in there, because then that's just more stuff you're gonna have to sand off. It's a little hard to get into some of these tight areas, but if you got to go back over it, then.
Now, as far as how thick you put on the body filler, what's the maximum thickness that you would ever apply?
About 1/8 of an inch is about max of what you want to have with a regular body filler. If you got to go any thicker than that, then you might want to use something that's reinforced with fiberglass to add a little bit of strength there. And then you'd be able to apply this over that. So the smoother you can get it as you're spreading it, that's just going to create less sanding for you. So try to spend a little bit of time getting that pretty straight. So that looks pretty good to me, Mark. So as we're letting this stuff cure, what's the next step in the sanding process? What kind of products we got here?
Well, what we want to do is on this curved surface here is we've got a finish first flexible block. Now this is going to be awesome to level this out and still maintain the curvature of that fender. So this tool is going to be perfect for the outside of that fender. Now the other spot that you did down here, the block sander may not get into those corners as well as what you'd like. So this is perfect auto zip, finish first auto zip to get into those radiuses like that, because it's got a curvature to it too. So I think we'll use this for that spot, the block sander for that, and I think that'll work nice.
Yeah, so we'll start with 80 grit first, and then after we get it to where it's starting to feather out, then we'll go to 180 to really get it to lay down flat, and then we'll be ready to epoxy prime it after that.
All right, let's get it done.
So it's dry enough to sand now. It's not sticky anymore, so we don't have to worry about it clogging the paper up. So we're going to start with 80 grit. And what we're going to do, the key to working these blocks is holding on the ends, because it will bow evenly. So you want to hold it on the ends and just kind of work at a 45. And what you want to do is you want to kind of work your shape. You don't want to try to work like that, and you don't want to get it sideways. You want to keep the block with the length of the panel. So as you can see, it's leveling off pretty quick. And you want to keep sanding until you get rid of all these little rough spots. And on the ends, you'll see it start to feather out. And what that means is it's starting to level off and become a lot straighter than where we started, where it was a little wadded up.
Okay.
So when you get into a radius, a good idea do too is to just use the edge of the block. So instead of holding it flat, just kind of hold the block up on the edge and just shove down. And that'll help to keep it from squaring it off. And as you get that feathered out, then you can start to lay the block flat again.
Okay, we're back here today. This was already sealed. We're sanding it down with 180 because we have to flatten these panels out. There's a lot of waviness to it. There's these factory spot welds that we really don't like. I think we'd do a lot cleaner job if we could get rid of those. How do we go about that?
Well, first we want to make sure that this is scuffed down and sanded as good as possible, because we're going to have adhesion problems if we don't. So we're going to use the Finish First scuff pads. We're going to get into these areas that the DA wouldn't and make sure everything's nice and scuffed. We don't want anything shiny, because that's going to be an adhesion problem.
Okay.
So we'll get all that scuff down. We'll wax and degrease it real good, and then we're going to tape off the areas that we don't want the body filler to get on, and we're just going to go ahead and skim coat the entire area to level it out and block it down. We'll start with 80 grit and work on our way up to 180, and then we're going to move on to some other problem areas. So we're here on the side of the cab where we put a light coat of body filler down low here. And I could start with the 11-inch block, but Finish First has a lot of different blocks to choose from. Mark, what do you think?
Well, I think the 5-inch block's going to be the best, and the reason why, it's reinforced with steel. And what that means is when I go to block sand this, it's going to flatten that surface down really quick, get a nice smooth finish, and I think this is going to be perfect for the job.
Nice.
Now, we've also had these sanding sponges. When would you use something like this?
Well, these sanding sponges is great because they're two-sided. It's actually premium paper that is bonded to a sponge. So what that does is it's actually going to contour to some of these reveals and body lines and shapes that's in this, and you can sand on them without having to worry about flattening them out too much. So it works great for that.
All right, we just got the cab out of the paint booth, and Michael, I got to tell you, you did an absolutely amazing job.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I was here late last night, but we've come a long way.
Yeah, we have. And that brings us up to the third stage of the 4P process, which is paint. And we've got a lot of different products here. We've got 6-inch DA discs, sponges, different tools, and we also have some waterproof sandpaper. And the main reason for this stage is to get rid of any blemishes in the paint, which is sags, runs, any debris that got into the paint. So, Michael, you want to show us how some of these products work?
Yeah, let's get busy.
All right.
So we're up here on the roof. I like to start at the highest point and work my way down. And I'm going to show you a couple options that we have. Finish First offers a micro zip, so if you're just looking to take small dirt nibs out, you could focus right on the dirt nib instead of working a big area. You could focus right on that. You could take the Finish First squeegee, dry it off to see where you're at. We also offer the Finish First 6-inch DA pad. So if you're working a little bit larger area, you want to make sure that this is wet. You work the area that you need to work. And again, you want to work small areas at a time, dry it off to see where you're at.
The first thing we did is the prep. We took out all of the rust that we could get. We cut out metal, replaced it. We had to seal it, which brought us up to the prime stage. We went and used primer, a high build primer, knocked it down. Then we turned around, blocked it with 400, then with 600, which brought us up to paint. We painted it, and it was shiny, but it was dirty, so we dulled it back down, used 1500, then we sanded it down with 2000, cleaned everything up, then to 2500. So now this thing is just as smooth as ever, but it's dull. So we have to bring this back up to a shine. What do we have to do to get there, Michael?
Well, in the polishing step, we're going to start with a 3,000 grit and work our way to 5,000 grit. And what that's going to do, that's going to help reduce the cut and buff time of the buffer. You don't have to use extra cut grits. You can use a regular cut. And there's two different ways we can do this.
Okay.
The flat areas, we'll go ahead and use the 3,000 grit on the DA pad. But once we get into the top of this door with all the different profiles in it, that DA is flat. It's not going to get down into them grooves, so we're going to have to do that by hand. So we'll go to 3,000 and then 5,000, and we're ready to buff it.
Okay, well, why don't you show me how to do it?
Let's get started. Okay, I'm going to start on the bottom of the door with 3,000 grit on a DA because it's flat. I'm going to stay away from the edges because that can burn through very easily, but you just want to keep it moving around. You don't want to stay in one area too long, and it'll start bringing some of that gloss level right back up with just this. I like to do small areas at a time, and then I'll dry them off with the Finish First squeegee. And I can kind of see where I'm at, make sure I didn't get any grit in the pad. That can happen with these DAs, so you never want to lay it down flat on a table somewhere because it can pick up grit in the pad. So I'm just kind of keep dunking it in the bucket to get it moist. If you're using electric DA, that's probably not a good idea. So you want to make sure that you just keep the panel wet and keep moving around. So on the top of the door, I'm going to do by hand because I don't want to get the DA down there. That could be a chance that I could burn through the paint. So I'll take this by hand. I've just wetted it and just start hand sanding it. So I'm using 3,000 grit here. So I'll go over this with 3,000 grit and then I'll go over the entire door with 5,000. Now, this is a cushioned abrasive, so it has a foam backing on it. It will actually absorb water, so it will help retain that water as you're sanding on it. All right, that's the last bolt. We just got to put the glass in. The rest of the hardware and the door's done.
All right, well, that concludes the last step of the 4P process. We did the prep, prime, paint, and polish. We're pushing towards our deadline to restore this Diamond T, so join us next week.